Good evening, I'm Saramia and you're watching AWANI Tonight. Can food protectionism solve food security issues? And how is Australia aiming to step up action on climate change? That's coming up. The chicken price ceiling in Peninsular Malaysia is set at 9 ringgit and 40 cents per kilogram. The new price control will take effect July 1st. Meanwhile, the price of grade A eggs will be set at 45 cents each, grade B at 43 cents, and grade C at 41 cents. Agriculture and Food Industries Minister, Datuk Seri Dr. Ronald Kiandi, announced this following a cabinet meeting to maintain existing government subsidies. He, however, did not state when the new ceiling price will expire. Currently, standard whole chickens are capped at 8 ringgit 90 cents per kg. Meanwhile, the cabinet has also approved a special task force to combat inflation and rising costs of living. The task force is set to meet twice a week and will be chaired by Communications and Multimedia Minister Tan Sri Anwar Musa. Several student unions say they will protest if the government refuses to come up with measures to combat the rising cost of living. This comes after the removal of certain subsidies, some beginning July 1st.
Among others, they called for existing subsidies to be maintained and for price control of goods on campus. The unions also said the increase in cash assistance announced as an alternative was unlikely to resolve the people's issues. They emphasized on the need to have an aid plan to help students who are also affected by rising prices.
The rise of global food and fuel prices led to many Asian Pacific nations to resort to food protectionism to secure supply and tame food inflation. While providing temporary relief, Steve Cochrane from Moody's Analytics says in the long term, these policies may distort the food market and trigger yet another food security crisis.
There can be some long-term distortions in some of these food markets and actually create some more difficult food security issues if this protectionism stays in place for a longer term. You can imagine if we take, for example, the ban of chicken exports out of Malaysia. It doesn't allow the producers of chicken to sell at the higher global prices that they can fetch if they export, which means that their revenues are limited. But then, indeed, if they have to continue, or if they want to continue producing, their input costs are higher because, particularly, chicken feed is higher, as so many other supplies are higher on the market. Much of the chicken feed is imported as well. So if you can't sell at a higher price, then it makes it difficult to produce when your input prices are high, and actually in the end could result in lower chicken production than higher chicken production. So you have could have a supply limitation that would lead to then even higher prices, rather than allowing markets to adjust at least temporarily to the higher prices that are in the global market at the moment, and at least allowing supply to continue at the current pace. And then hopefully over the long term, as input prices begin to ebb, then prices come back into a more normal range.
With lower income households spending most of their income on food, they would be the worst affected by distortions in the food market. Steve suggests for countries to diversify their food sources and increase production efficiency.
If food protection policies led towards long-term distortions in some of the markets that ultimately led to either supply issues or pricing issues, then that could, in the long run, extend some of these problems for some of the lower-income households. I think it's better to work with the global markets as they are, to diversify sources of the various kinds of foods that are imported, so at least one can try to find the lowest cost source, and then of course in many ways trying to increase production, increase efficiency in local production as well. Also to improve infrastructure and storage so that the movement of food can be done more easily, less expensive, and food can be stored for a longer period of time. And finally, simply finding ways of creating new methods of production, whether it be expanding production, the areas of production, perhaps going into more I'm not quite sure what the right word is, but industrial food production, producing food within controlled environments to be a little more efficient and to be able to produce more food locally rather than importing food.
More on local developments. The government will reduce the number of agencies with access to the National Registration Department database. Home Minister Datuk Seri Hamzah Zainuddin says this is to stem leaks of private data.
Zina Harian reports how Hamzah came to the decision after the Home Ministry identified those attempting to sell personal records of 22.5 million Malaysians for $10,000 on the internet. Following the leak, only 44 agencies will have access to the NRD database. There will also be watermarks on datasets to help identify the sources of future leaks. Hamzah clarified that the NRD was not responsible for the leak and that it could have come from the internet, telecommunication companies, financial institutions, and other government agencies.
Tan Sri Muhammad Apandi Ali will remain chairman of the Batu Putih Special Task Force. De facto Law Minister Datuk Seri Wan Junaidi Tuanku Jaafar says there will be no change in leadership despite objections from certain quarters.
Wan Junaidi was responding to former Prime Minister Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad, who left an inquiry yesterday in protest of Apandi's role. Apandi was appointed chairman of the Special Task Force following the Cabinet's decision on October 29th last year. Wan Junaidi says any objections on the matter should have been brought up earlier. The task force, which has operated for 7 months now, will continue its responsibilities to produce a final report as planned.
Meanwhile, domestic tourism spending in 2021 dropped more than 50% to register 18.4 billion ringgit compared to 40.4 billion ringgit in 2020. Department of Statistics Malaysia says COVID measures to contain emerging variants were among the reasons for the decline.
Chief Statistician Datuk Seri Dr. Muhammad Uzair Maidin said nationwide flood disasters towards the end of 2021 also deterred domestic travel. Domestic arrivals fell nearly half in 2021, with 66 million visitors as compared to 131.7 million visitors in the previous year, a 72.4% drop compared to the pre-pandemic 2019. Places with most domestic visitors in 2021 were Selangor, with more than 10 million visitors, followed by Kuala Lumpur and Sarawak.
Time for a quick break. We'll be right back.
COVID-19 memperlihatkan kepada kita betapa pantasnya adaptasi teknologi di kalangan PKS kita. Niaga AWANI dan Unified Business akan menyelami perjalanan kebangkitan semula PKS kita melalui segmen Jiwa SME setiap Selasa dan Khamis untuk inspirasi anda.
Transformasikan perniagaan dengan Unified Business, rakan digital pilihan anda. Hubungi kami sekarang dan jimat sehingga 50%. Jom Unified Business.
You're wondering what happens now.
The Illuminati will see you, Stephen. Oh, that's something. We will see what kind of Doctor Strange you are.
Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Stream sekarang di Disney Plus Hotstar. Naik taraf ke Ultrabox atau aktifkannya sekarang di astro.com.my/Disney.
Welcome back. Australia is often labeled as a climate laggard in its response to tackling climate change. How could the newly elected Labour Party, poised for ambitious climate policies, save the country's tarnished reputation? In an exclusive interview with Astro AWANI, Foreign Minister Penny Wong highlights Australia's plans to turn the tide, including transforming the energy sector.
Well, you will see a government with much more ambition and a government that is committed to action on climate. We were elected with a much more ambitious policy position. We have reflected some of that already in terms of our indication to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate that we will have a more ambitious target for 2030, so the net zero emissions by 2050, but also a 43% reduction by 2030. We have said we will transform the energy sector and the energy grid. We would anticipate over 80% of our energy will come from renewable sources by the end of this decade. So they're the sort of top line issues. But just so people understand, we were elected, the last time we were elected with a very ambitious plan on climate. I was the first climate minister. Prime Minister Albanese was actually was the person in our party, a spokesperson, who drafted our policy for the 2007 election, which was much more ambitious on climate and renewable energy. So, and Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, you have two people whose personal commitment to this issue is very strong, and you have a government, a Labor government, whose commitment to this issue is very strong. So, you know, I hope we can return to the position we used to be in, which is people looked to us for, constructive engagement and some leadership on climate.
To find out more about Australia's foreign policy, tune into the full interview with Senator Penny Wong on Consider This, coming right up after AWANI Tonight. Philippine authorities have ordered the closure of Rappler, a new site founded by Nobel Peace Prize winner Maria Ressa. The decision came a day before President Rodrigo Duterte is due to leave office. The news outlet confirmed the Securities and Exchange Commission's decision to revoke the operating license of Rappler Inc. and Rappler Holdings Corporation. This after SEC and the courts concluded Rappler's funding model was unconstitutional. Rappler is one of the few media outlets critical of Duterte's administration and the drug war he launched in 2016. The regulator first issued an order against Rappler in 2018 and accused it of allowing foreigners to take control of its website, a breach of foreign ownership restrictions in Philippines media. Ressa said the site will continue to run as usual and that Rappler would challenge the order in court. Meanwhile, Japan is sweltering under the hottest day yet of its worst heat wave for almost 150 years. Tokyo recorded temperatures above 35 degrees today for a fifth straight day. Japan's meteorological agency forecasted Tokyo temperatures to stay above 30 degrees Celsius until July 5th. Cases of heat stroke have also spiked amid the record-breaking heat wave. Emergency services confirmed at least 76 people were taken to hospital today. Meanwhile, the government said electricity demand and supply situation is expected to be the toughest in the last 3 days of the week. Officials issued alerts this week of possible power shortages. Businesses, meanwhile, have responded by conserving electricity. Prime Minister Fumio Kishida reportedly said that the government would ramp up the use of nuclear power to supply electricity. At least 3 people were killed and 5 wounded after a Russian missile struck at targets in the Mykolaiv area in southern Ukraine today. The target had hit a residential building. Moscow claims its forces had hit what it called a training base for foreign mercenaries in the region. The city mayor said 8 missiles had hit the city, urging residents to evacuate. The strikes took place just 2 days after a Russian missile hit a shopping mall, with rescuers still searching for dozens missing. Over in the Spanish capital, Madrid, leaders of NATO countries meet to discuss more support for Ukraine as it defends itself from a Russian invasion. That's all we have for you on AWANI Tonight. Thank you for watching. My name is Soraya Mia. We'll see you again soon.